let's just show it. So you see it coming in for a landing. It's obviously a snowy day. The runway has snow. And it's a huge jet. When I heard regional jet, I thought small. No, it's a huge jet. And fire when the wheels touch down, or so it looks, followed by a cloud of black smoke. It's very clear. I don't know why this guy was filming this particular landing, but man, he got the whole thing. It went on its side. It then flipped upside down. And somehow everyone survived. So, Whiz, how does this happen?
Well, Megyn, thanks for having me back again. Sadly, under these circumstances, or actually since everybody got out, I guess we're okay. Megyn, the first thing, when I saw the in-cockpit video this morning, I heard you reading your email in the last block there. Then I guess I can talk like this. That jet was coming down like a turd off a tall moose. Landing an F-18 aboard an aircraft carrier, our average rate of descent is about 800 feet per minute. And I think the last flight tracker data that I saw for this RJ was about 1,100 feet per minute. So that RJ came down a lot faster and harder than I would have landed aboard the boat. And I think, one of the officials yesterday or last night said, hey, crosswind wasn't an issue. Whenever anything like this happens, Megyn, I grab my aviation app and I immediately look at the weather, see what the weather is. And landing on runway 23, the winds were out at 270, so about 40 degrees off the nose or down the runway in really gusty conditions. So it looks like this airplane didn't really have too much of a flare, which is when you get close into the runway, we pull the nose back, pull back on the throttles, and kind of do that nice, what we as Navy pilots would say, Air Force landing. But this landing was hard, and it looks like it sheared off the right main landing gear, took the wing with it, and then the only wing that was left, the left wing, still producing lift, they kind of corkscrew and roll down the runway. But my God, we jokingly in aviation say any landing we can walk away from is a good landing. That was a pretty bad landing, and thank God a lot of people walked away.
But just to clarify what you're saying, so they say weather's not an issue, but you're saying you have questions about that based on the data that you saw.
Oh my God, yeah. I mean, whether if they're talking about clouds or low ceilings or anything like that, just because the sun is out doesn't mean the weather is great. Very, very gusty conditions. When I looked at my phone after the mishap, it was 25 gusts, 45 knots, which is absolutely significant. That's some sporty wind conditions. If it's right down the runway, right on the nose, that's fine. Still a little sporty. But if it's 40 degrees off, you're kind of crabbing into the wind and having to take that crab out at the last second. Very, very sporty conditions. So
sporty.
Yeah,
what a word.
Or varsity or JV, however you want to word it. It was definitely not pleasant conditions. So whether if you're
dangerous,
about ceilings,
obviously. So Greg,
clearly.
do you agree with that? And if so, I always like to tell myself, as somebody who used to fly out of O'Hare all the time in very snowy, bad conditions, they wouldn't let the plane take off if this weren't safe to fly in. So what, should they not have been flying planes in this kind of wind?
No, these winds, as Whiz will tell you, are winds that pilots are trained to handle. There are certain limitations, not only with the aircraft, but the airline sets a policy about wind conditions as well. But when you look at this landing in the video, that aircraft was coming down at a high rate of descent. You typically will go into a flare and arrest that descent so that when you touch down, your rate of descent is maybe 100 to 200 feet a minute rather than 1,100. The nominal is about 500 to 700 feet per minute. So
so just put that in layman's terms. You're saying it was coming down faster than it should have been?
Absolutely, almost double, almost twice as fast as it should have been. And again, that's the problem, is you saw the right wing drop just before the airplane touched down on the runway. That's what took all that high energy impact, was that right main landing gear, the wing. That's what snapped it off. And as Whiz said, the left wing was still producing lift, which rolled that airplane and got it sliding sideways. I'm going to be interested to know from the flight data recorder not only what the G trace, that's the G impact, because it's a recorded parameter, how many G forces were experienced on that landing. but to determine whether or not the actual nose of the airplane was cocked off center. A lot of times in these crosswinds, and there were crosswinds, they were gusty crosswinds, and as Whiz knows, when you're flying, you'll typically add a gust factor. You'll actually increase your speed by half the gust factor to give you more controllability. All of these things are going to have to be dissected by the investigators to see what kind of flying and who was flying at the time of the accident.
I want to point out we got that video that we're showing from an account on X called Air Main Engineer. Just a stunningly perfect video. I mean, I'm sure at the NTSB, Greg, you would have been thrilled to have this kind of a video of a plane crash.
Megyn, I'll tell you, I call it the electronic witness. You know, years past, when I first went to work for the board a long time ago, you'd spend a lot of time hunting down witnesses, and then you'd have to ferret out fact from fiction. They'd tell you 1,000 different stories, and you tried to pick the factoids. Now we have an electronic witness. It doesn't lie. It just basically records the artifacts of the accident. This is great for investigators because this information, in combination with flight data recorder information, and then of course CVR and the crew interviews, is going to put a very complete story together in a very short period of time.
Now, Whiz, this is, okay, I'm told that this is a CRJ 900 configured with seats for 70 to 76 passengers. It looks huge. It doesn't look like one of those small regional jets, God rest them, like the folks who went down from Kansas into DC, you know, the last time we were talking to you. It looks larger to me. But I know you did mention then, and I've read in connection with this, that those regional pilots are not quite as trained as the, you know, big old American Airlines jet pilots that we have on the, you know, DC-10s or 747s that we fly.
Well, let me rephrase that or clean that up a little bit. They're certainly trained, right? The FAA has standards. You have to meet these minimum standards. Endeavor Air has standards. So clearly, those two aviators sitting in front of that regional jet had met the standards, the minimum standards. I think what the nuance is experience. That's probably, I'll clean it up by saying experience. Mm-hmm. Not to, not to talk down to any folks in the regional jet. I wasn't born the world's best fighter pilot, or actually I was, but you're not born, with thousands and thousands of flight hours, right? You got to get your hours somewhere. So a lot of the folks in the regionals are doing their time, right? They're building their hours. I don't know too many folks who make flying in the regionals a career. They want to fleet up, so to speak, to the main line, to Delta, United, FedEx, where the big money is. So a lot of these regional jet crews are overworked and definitely underpaid, in my opinion. But they have got to meet the minimum requirements.
Like,
they have to do their annual check
would
rides.
you fly as a passenger on a regional jet?
I would, Megyn. I mean, the fact that all of these, before we jumped on the air, Greg and I were talking about, last week we lost a Growler, an E-18 crash. We had an F-35 crash in Eielson Air Force Base weeks ago, and then we've had all these other mishaps. If these were spread out over the fiscal year or the calendar year, they'd be blips on the news media radar for a little bit. But the fact that we're kind of squished into a month here, everybody's freaking out. And I get it, but as you know, intuitively, driving to or from the airport is the most dangerous part of this exercise. I'd have no problems getting on an RJ, but trust me, Megyn, I peek in the cockpit when I get on every once in a while. Just I don't know why I do.
You could fly all the flights I'm on. I want you behind that wheel. I'm a little worried here, Greg, because I got to be honest. I always thought that almost like 99% of what happens when we're on board the flight is done by autopilot, which I liked. It's almost impossible to crash these planes because the autopilot's got it. The one where the helicopter bumped into the plane was a freak accident. But this does appear, from what you're saying, to look like pilot error. How much is the autopilot involved on takeoff and landing?
Well, we got to unpack a lot of that, Megyn. One, as Whiz was talking about, quote, experience, let me just tell you that in aviation, we don't mark years as our years of experience or the base of experience. We judge that, or at least use hours of flight time, as the marker for experience. That'll be one aspect of this particular investigation that the NTSB, in assisting the TSB up in Canada, will try to determine what was the crew's experience. How often were they trained? How much, what was their background and things like that. Now, as far as the autopilot is used, yes, the autopilot flies the airplane, especially in the larger aircraft, basically 90% of the time. It is encouraged by the airlines for pilots to hand fly so that they don't lose those tactile flying skills. You don't want automation flying all the time. But typically in this type of airplane, takeoffs and landings are done by one of the two pilots manually. You're not using an autopilot. You'll use some navigation guidance on some of the airplanes, but typically, unless it's almost 0-0, which airplanes can land in 0-0 conditions, there are some airplanes that are certified to do that. You'll typically have one of the pilots landing the airplane manually. And there's nothing wrong with that, even under these conditions.
That's where the pilot earns his or her pay. So, Whiz, why wasn't this a deadly crash? The fire coming out from behind it, the air, it flips. We've seen planes like explode on landing. Like, why? How is it that everybody lived?
Well, that's above my pay grade, Megyn, and thank God that all these folks lived.
Look at this. These are people upside down because it landed on its, with its belly up.
Correct. Yeah, well, Mitsubishi, I think it is good on them for the manufacturer that these folks lived in the seats. Thankfully, or not, I guess I can say thankfully, this mishap was on landing, so that aircraft wasn't packed full of fuel. This could be a whole different story if this happened on takeoff, or they were coming in to land full of fuel for whatever reason. The crash rescue folks, they're literally sitting in different alert positions on these airfields. They are waiting for something like this to happen. It's sad to say, but as a crash rescue crewman, I don't ever want to be used, but I'm ready to be used. They were on that crash almost immediately, and they were foaming down the aircraft to protect against the fire. But this literally, it's got to come up to a higher power, because as I saw, this mishap occur, and then I saw the video, I'm like, I'm absolutely stunned that more people didn't get hurt.
We continue to face uncertainty when it comes to the economy, with a perfect storm brewing as Social Security and Medicare hit a breaking point as the largest generation is hitting retirement. A smaller workforce means a smaller tax base. You pair that with our growing national debt and rising cost of living, and we could have a big problem. So what are you doing now to protect your family for the future? Gold can be a safe haven in hard economic times, and Birch Gold makes it easy to diversify a portion of your savings into physical gold. Birch Gold will help you transition an existing IRA or 401k into an IRA in gold, and it does not cost you 1 cent out of pocket. Protect your future today. Text MK to 989898, get your free info kit on gold, and get a copy of the Ultimate Guide for Gold in the Trump Era with a foreword by Donald Trump Jr. There's no obligation, just information. Birch Gold has earned the trust of countless Americans looking to safeguard their savings. Just text my initials MK to the number 989898 today. Thanks so much for watching. If you like what you just saw, hit the subscribe button for more clips and full episodes.